live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Thursday, December 7th, 2017, Pearl Harbor Day. For those of you who, I guess, have no calendars. I mean, what else can I say to you? Yes, that's right. And I think, wasn't that the day that George H.W. Bush got wrong in one of the speeches, like early on? I'm so old. I think he, at one point during the 1988 campaign, mistook September 7th for December 7th. Or maybe that was George W. Bush. I can't keep the two of them straight. I don't know. I guess I've been distracted by the fact that that Poppy has been ass grabbing people from his wheelchair, and maybe even before that. How did that get into mind? I don't know. Anyway, not what I intended to focus on this morning. Not that I had a focus, but Daily Coast Radio is live now. Bill says so from Portland, Maine, so it must be true. We're live, and following the lead of his courageous president, today, following the lead of his courageous president, Kagro X, that's me, hi everybody, broadcasts in ill-fitting dentures, but no polydent, because that's for sissies, or I should say, that's for sissies. I don't know what happened to the president last night. I didn't watch it live by any means, but by early evening, I had seen, John Aravosis had picked up on the situation, whatever it was, watching Trump's speech apparently deteriorate during the statement he was giving on a subject he didn't really and truly understand in any way, according to reports, moving the United States Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as he put it. And so what happened to him was variously described as sounding like his dentures had come loose, or that perhaps he had some sort of brain episode stroke going on, which, at advanced age is always possible. It's possible, I guess, at any age, but more likely at advanced age. And people have worried about his mental capacity for a long time, and this just added more to it. Apparently, the way Aravosis saw it, and he provided his video evidence, and it's not the clearest stuff in the world, but he also provided, I guess, his signature on whatever piece of paper they decided needed to accompany this speech about moving the embassy also appeared to be distinctly different in its composition from his regular signature, which is, I always have felt like he went to a handwriting expert and focus grouped a signature for himself. What kind of signature would make me look like a bold decision maker? And, he adds extra letters to his name so that there's more up and down bold strokes of his pen. And this one was a little shakier and a little loopier and wider and less precise. And, none of it has ever been precise. It doesn't look like his name. But anyway, who knows? And I guess if we think that there's a medical episode, we're not supposed to make fun of it. But because the White House is going to cover it up and say nothing was wrong, well, then we'll take your word for it. Nothing's wrong. You're just a mush mouth. And I guess we could leave it at that. I don't know. It wasn't overly dramatic, but a lot of people noticed it. A lot of people are saying that the president sounded like something had gone terribly wrong inside of his mouth. And it was weird. And he even somehow managed to mispronounce United States. So God bless the United States. I don't know. Maybe it is dentures that came loose. I feel like he speaks that way anyway. I mean, when I do that voice, I try imagining what would it be like if all of my teeth came loose from my gums at the same time, but I wanted to keep them all inside of my mouth. And I would be doing that with my very active lips, which is a little bit like what might have been going on. So I don't know. I mean, if it was some sort of episode, obviously that's pretty serious, and somebody ought to get in there and do some sort of evaluation. But, I guess honestly enough, no matter who the president is, if you suspect that, well, one, you got to do something. And two, I wouldn't really expect to hear early honesty from any White House. If the president was having small strokes, there's something that they would want to decide what to do with before they made any public announcements. Now, on the other hand, I guess I could say this is something you probably have seen coming if you're a medical officer, and you probably warned them you're going to need to have a contingency plan in place. And you got one. It's called the vice president. He's a lousy son of a bitch, but he's the vice president. And constitutionally speaking, you're covered. But they don't want to do anything. I mean, you know what happens is they would have to invoke the 25th Amendment, and they don't want anything to do with that. They don't want to put that in anybody's mind. So who knows? We'll keep an eye on it. Yeah, there was some writing on the subject of the speech. That is to say, there are people writing on the suspicion that he didn't understand much of what he was doing. And I have some questions now about whether or not my phone is correctly archiving articles that I think I'm marking for Pocket. I think this is becoming an issue. I'll have to work on that one. There's definitely some writing about that I will share with you. Breaking news, however, that I can share with you that did make it to Pocket because I did it from my desktop computer. MSNBC, the network with the most letters in its acronym, has reversed its DECISION decision to fire contributor Sam SEDER. MSNBC and SEDER are getting back together, says Ryan GRIM of The Intercept, which is long and I don't want to spell it. Do I read the story to you? I don't think I need to even do that. That will only delay our entry from Greg Dworkin and discussing other things. But I'll give you the lead. Progressive radio and television personality Sam Seder will be offered his MSNBC contributor job back and plans to accept, according to multiple MSNBC SOURCES. Seder and MSNBC were set to part ways when his contributor contract expired next year, with reports indicating the departure had to do with a 2009 tweet, you heard the story, from Seder surfaced by the far-right provocateur Mike Cernovich. After initially caving into right-wing internet outrage over the tweet, MSNBC reversed its decision to not renew Seder's contract. He's got a comment. I appreciate MSNBC's thoughtful reconsideration and willingness to understand the cynical motives of those who intentionally misrepresented my tweet for their own toxic political purposes, Seder said in a statement. We are experiencing an important and long overdue moment of empowerment for the victims of sexual assault and of reckoning for their perpetrators. I am proud that MSNBC and its staff have set a clear example of the need to get it right. That is great. The statement I saw quoted in the tweet that led me to this was basically, sometimes you get these things wrong, and we made a mistake and we're reversing it. And that's good. That's exactly how you want them to handle. Well, you want them to handle it right the first time. But it's nice that they have been able to do that. And object lesson, I think, also in all this. Sam was pissed, and his supporters were pissed. But Sam kept his head through it all, and I think it sounded like from most of his public statements on the subject, held out hope that they could be persuaded to change their mind and approach things with that idea in mind. I mean, obviously his supporters very often who don't have to do all of the dealings inside and behind the scenes were miffed and went straight to screw MSNBC forever, I hate your guts. Which would have made it extraordinarily difficult for them to reverse their decision had Sam done it. But Sam's a pretty even-keeled guy. He's got his passions, but I've never really seen him completely fly off the handle for no reason. So, well done. Well handled by everybody, I guess, minus the initial caving in to Mike Cernovich. But yeah, you should be recognizing that, Cernovich is never going to tell you anything good for any good reason. He's an internet troll. He wants to F you up, basically. And if you listen to him, you're walking into a trap. So I'm glad that's been reversed. I'm glad Greg Dworkin is here. You've decided not to boycott this show after our agreeing to let you hang up yesterday.
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, good.
A couple of comments on your opening remarks. I did see the Trump speech, such as it was live.
Yes.
It was disconcerting. I really don't know what it was. The worry is that his age, he was having what's called a TIA, a transient ischemic attack. What happens is that when you eat two double cheeseburgers in a row,
okay,
and wash it down with some lard, then it goes directly through your cerebral artery, temporarily blocking it, and you get a little less blood flow to the brain. And then if it hits your speech center, you act a little bit funny, and then it goes away. And that's something that his medical people should be checking out. But
they should.
Josh Marshall reminded us on Twitter, I don't have it in front of me, but to paraphrase, what he basically said is, don't forget, the only medical records we ever got from Donald Trump or from Dr. Feelgood up on the Upper East Side, who essentially said that he's the reincarnation of Thor. So It's not like we have a real clear idea of what his medical standing and situation is.
We should add that neither does Dr. Feelgood have a real clear indication of what his medical stature is.
He wrote what he was told to write.
Yeah, and then when he was not being dictated to, you remember that he sort of reversed himself and basically said, well, I don't know, I could be wrong. If he dies, he dies. That was his doctor.
It's not my problem. I got other patients.
Right. I don't know. I will say he did look a little, the film I saw was cut, first 30 seconds of the thing, and in the last 30 seconds, and he looked a little purple in the face in part 2. But again, that plus, slurred speech and not making a particularly clear case for himself is also just every day for Donald Trump. So you need a medical professional to know what's going on.
Right.
You're one. So you said which other one you should hire to figure it out.
Well, Perfect. Yeah, because I don't diagnose over the television. I'm not Bill Frist. So let's get back to what really is happening. I thought this was interesting. We've talked about the Never Trumpers. We've talked about conservatives who have issues with what's going on with the Republican Party. Here's ex-Republican Matthew Dowd saying, here's the difference today on abuse of women. The Dems took their time and came to the conclusion to hold Conyers Franken accountable, and presumably Franken will be resigning today. The GOP took their time and decided to fully support Trump and more. And that's a mammoth difference. And, of course, that's true.
Yes.
I and you and everybody else have been struggling with the idea that the Democrats took their time to rush to judgment and how you hold those two concepts in your head at the same time. And, to me, that's just an example of how it's almost impossible to get it right. So naturally, you're going to be up to some criticism and open to some criticism, whatever it is you do. But for the most part, even though it's not unanimous, there's plenty of Franken supporters out there who don't feel like he should resign and feel like he gets to walk the plank and then the GOP doesn't. Nonetheless, you got to do what you got to do, and I got more on that. And I think that Matthew Dowd accurately summed that up. And to give you an example of how that plays out, here's a tweet from John Weaver.
Okay.
Right, and I believe this was a John Kasich advisor, as well as a John McCain advisor. So JWGOP is his handle on Twitter, John Weaver. He announces, proud to join my fellow true GOP warriors, Mark Salter, Mike Murphy, Matt David, and Tim Miller, who was the spokesperson, I believe, for Jeb Bush, in donating to G. Douglas Jones for U.S. Senate. We're doing this to put America first, but also to save the GOP. Doug Jones is an honorable man and will be a good senator, country over party.
Okay. He's got GOP in his handle.
He does.
So that's serious.
It is serious. So hopefully there's more. And hopefully there are more GOP people that do that. Interesting. So immediately it turned Laura Bassett, I think, just summed it up. It's one of many, many, many tweets in a similar vein, as well as commentary. Conyers resigns, Franken will resign. Moore gets a $50,000 check from the RNC to help him win a Senate seat. What's wrong with this picture? And so if you think Democrats are going to make an issue of this, they are. And so they're the party that got around to taking care of what they thought were inappropriate behavior in their party. And Blake Farenthold is still in Congress, Roy Moore is still running, and Donald Trump is still president. And by the way, Clarence Thomas is still in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so it turns out. A lot of discussion and a lot of thought about Anita Hill yesterday, who was, I guess, got mentioned in the Time article. I didn't see whether she got a profile among the many women, but she didn't speak out this year, of course.
Also, Gretchen Carlson wasn't on the cover, and arguably she started the whole thing. Not the Me Too movement, but the actual snowball that wound up with the report about Bill O'Reilly, and then that followed with Harvey Weinstein.
I saw a great tweet storm about Gretchen Carlson as a leader in this, and that there are some questions arising, but we'll save that for another time.
I mean, but she had that side of it.
Yes, she was there.
She had the other side of it too, which is that her work on Fox is not exactly admirable, but that's not the point.
That's it. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about.
Now, here's an article that appeared yesterday in The Atlantic.
Just by magic.
Tina Dupuy, D-U-P-U-Y? I don't know how that's pronounced.
She's never been on the show, so we don't know. Dupuy? That sounds
I
good.
believe Franken's accusers because he groped me too.
Oh.
It's a pretty straightforward headline. The Democratic Party needs to stand with women who have been harassed and not defend the politicians who abuse them.
Don't say it that way. Harassed. That's okay.
Bothered. The author, Kate Harding, shortly after Leanne Tweeden published her account, wrote a piece for the Washington Post headline, "I'm a feminist, I study rape culture, and I don't want Al Franken to resign."
She studies rape culture?
Yeah, well, people do that for academics. In it, she rehashes what Steinem wrote 20 years ago. That's Gloria Steinem. "These are our guys. We must protect them, especially if there's a risk one could be replaced by a Republican. If we set this precedent in the interest of demonstrating our party's solidarity with harassed and abused women, we're only going to drain the swamp of people who, however flawed, still regularly vote to protect women's rights and freedoms." And the author, Tina Dupuy, says, really? If Democrats demonstrate our party's solidarity with harassed and abused women, something bad will happen to women's rights? Are you kidding me? Is that why there's a slush fund on Capitol Hill to settle sexual harassment claims with taxpayer dollars because of feminism? I heard this argument in private, too. It's about protecting power and asking the victims to understand the larger goal of maybe protecting them sometime soon. This calculation was more reasonable in the 80s. Now it seems like a Faustian bargain that's doomed women's ascension to real power. Boys will be boys and girls will be quiet. I have a radical idea. Maybe Democrats can replace politicians who harass and abuse women with anybody other than an abuser. There are good men out there in the world. I married one. I work with many more. Do we really believe our talent pool will dry up and our caucus will be non-existent once we kick out all the creepers? I don't. What if protecting men who harass and abuse women isn't actually good for women? Maybe, just maybe, it's only good for the men. Right? So there's that.
Yeah.
I have, toward the bottom of the list, I sent you a Gabriel De Benedetti tweet. And it says what Al Franken's constituents are waking up to this morning. It's the Star Tribune in Minnesota. Franken told to go in big, bold headlines. Senate Democrats turn on him in force. He'll announce the decision today. And then they have a picture of every single senator who said he has to go. And it's a large, it looks like a yearbook because there's so many headshots of Democrats saying you have to go.
Yeah. There's a lot. Okay. Oh, right. By the way, yes, I finally figured out now. I looked back at that clip about who it was that was studying rape culture. It was Kate Harding.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I was confused. Like they were saying Leanne Tweeden did, and I don't think she did.
No.
Okay.
No, she did not.
Got it.
So there's that. And then here's an interesting tweet storm I found from Kelly Barnhill, who says, okay, I need to say some stuff about Al Franken, my senator, whose work I have treasured and who now stands at a crossroads. First of all, I think he should have resigned at the very beginning of this when the picture came out, because this is politics and optics matter, and because we're at this moment at this place of reckoning, and that photo is just not going to go away. But I keep thinking about this in terms of story and how we envision our own stories and how we respond to that which we cannot control to write the stories of our own work and futures, to create new chapters that empower rather than diminish. Because if we think about the chapters of Franken's life so far, it's an interesting story, isn't it? And there have been so many redemptive, important moments and decisions so far, I think they can inform the choice he needs to make now. First of all, he marries Franny, who's awesome and who rules. And he stays married, and that speaks to his character. And he comes out of the world of comedy, which, let's face it, is a gross industry surrounded by pus-filled boils masquerading as men.
Oh.
I think she's referring to Louis C.K. And uses the skills as a comedy writer to do good in the world, to write books that pillory and excoriate the cynical tools of the right. His book about Rush Limbaugh, important. His book about Fox News, important. This was good work. It exposed industry of lies. That's the right-wing influence machine. It gives us tools to be able to talk about it. That was an important chapter. And then, in response to the grief of losing his friends Paul, Sheila runs for Senate, and it was a hard-fought race, and he did it with hard work and dignity. And then, again, he's replacing Paul Wellstone. And then instead of grandstanding showmanship, become a sober, number-crunching, researching sort of senator.
Yes.
And that was also an important chapter, and it speaks to his character. It speaks to his growth as a person. I admired him for it then, and I still do. And now I get that it's scary. I get that the next election season in Minnesota is going to be a freaking nightmare. Not the word she used. 5 congressional seats in play, plus both houses of the legislature, plus the governor's seat, and now not just 1 but 2 Senate seats. Parenthetically, by the way, Amy Klobuchar, the only comment she made is, I spoke to Franken, and I'm sure he'll do the right thing. She did not call for him to resign. Mm-hmm. She just said, he's talking tomorrow. Why don't you wait for him to do it? So she's being Minnesota nice.
Yes.
We are literally facing a tsunami. Back to Kelly Barnhill. We're literally facing a tsunami of political money, and it's going to be ugly. But if he doesn't step down, he's going to be the only story for all of those races. And that's just the reality. But now Al Franken has a chance to write a new chapter, an important chapter. And yes, it's not the chapter he wanted, but it could be great. Because right now he has the chance to be a listener instead of a speaker and a supporter instead of the star. He has a chance to show men everywhere how to decenter himself, to create a space for new voices, and to fuel the engines of new careers. He has a chance to change national conversation, to demonstrate atonement, reconciliation, show others how to repair, reform, and transform. And that's what I hope he does. And then he can tell Dayton, who's the governor, insist that he should pick maybe, and give some names that she would prefer, for the Senate slot that he will sit down from, except that won't happen because Dayton will pick a neutral person who's not going to run, so that he doesn't have to put his finger on the scale of who's going to replace. But that's basically her sentiment, and says, look, I get it. I understand how important he was. He's a great guy. He has to step down. There's a lot of things going on, including Minnesota politics locally. And you got to be cognizant of all of that. The narrative matters and the optics matter. So that's the way it has to be.
Yes. Well, okay. It helps.
You know, so it gives you an idea of what's going on.
I like it. Okay.
Speaking of optics, so now we have the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, himself a accused sexual abuser.
Yes, that was well done.
Ginny Thomas presenting an award to James O'Keefe for defending liberty.
Yeah, through, attempted rape. But whatever.
So Kenneth Vogel tweeted that, and Chuck Todd says, sometimes I swear this entire year has been some liberal's parody of how they think some on the right would act.
Some liberal.
And I said to Chuck Todd, why don't you just say we were right and leave it at that?
Yeah, right. That liberal, whoever that some liberal was right. Which is really to say that any basic, ordinary liberal person off the street who Chuck Todd would have otherwise laughed at because they're not an expert like him was right the whole time.
So
Again,
I'm actually going to try to sum up my segment before the break and get everything in, because I got to scoot off to work today a little bit early. But I did leave you with some stuff. One of the things I left you with is an interesting piece from Charles P. Pierce over at Esquire.
Yes. I remember
what was
him.
with today's impeachment charges? Don't laugh. Okay, maybe laugh.
What?
Because there was a vote.
Oh,
there were actual impeachment resolutions.
I heard that was going to happen, and I forgot about it.
And it did, and it got 58 votes.
Yeah, all right.
And he reminds us that in the Clinton case with Bill Clinton, it started with Bob Barr, and everybody laughed at him, and then you know what happened the following year.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
But he actually reads the articles. Article 1, in his capacity as President of the United States, unmindful of the high duties of his high office and the dignity and proprieties thereof, and of the harmony and courtesies necessary for stability within the society of the United States, Donald John Trump has with his statements done more than insult individuals and groups of Americans. He's harmed the society of the United States, brought shame and dishonor to the office of the President of the United States, sowing discord among the people of the U.S. by associating the majesty and dignity of the presidency with causes rooted in white supremacy, bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, white nationalism, or neo-Nazism. That's Article 1. And then
One
Article
A.
2 is, in his capacity as President of the United States, unmindful of the high duties of his high office, Donald John Trump has, with his statements, done more than simply insult individuals and groups. He's harmed American society by publicly casting contempt on individuals and groups, inciting hate and hostility, sowing discord among the people on the basis of race, national origin, religion, gender, etc., etc., etc. And Charles P. Pierce writes, and for supporting evidence, Green, this is Texan Al Green, cited everything from the president's Muslim ban to his having called protesting NFL players sons of bitches. All of it certainly relevant to the charge of the president as demeaned the office, his fellow citizens, and democratic government all the way back to Pericles. Seriously, even if these charges do not rise to the level of impeachable offenses, which are defined hazily anyway, there isn't one of them that's wrong or anywhere near as truthless as Kellyanne Conway's assertion of the president's allegedly high moral standards.
True. No one impeached her.
Yeah, and though you can blow it off as frivolous, fact of the matter is, this is where we all stood at the end of business on Wednesday, as the Senate was voting to go to conference with the House of Representatives on their abomination of desolation tax bill. And the odds are very good that by next Wednesday, Donald Trump would still be in the White House and Roy Moore would be a senator-elect, Al Franken would be a senator no more, and irony would die the 343rd of its 1,000 deaths.
Yes. Very true.
Right?
And yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. Another interesting thing, by the way, I'll just throw in, is that there's these folks that follow Twitter in terms of what people post and how intense they post about it.
Yes.
And they actually think Doug Jones has a reasonable chance to win.
Well, that would be terrific. Obviously, a great follow-up on all that. I'm hoping for it even after the break. And all right, so we are now facing our break. Is this really true? You have to go?
I do.
Okay, we can permit it. I have plenty to go on, and I have some follow-up to that Esquire piece about why it's more important than we thought. Thanks very much, Greg.
Yeah, take care.
Appreciate it. Take care. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We have to continue for our second segment without Greg Dworkin. Yes, an early-ish day at work. A lot of you are at work earlier. That's true. But, we feel the loss deeply. But there's plenty of material to go with. He's organized the whole show for us once again. And we're gonna use at least part of that. By the way, just taking in some of the comments along the way here. Let's see. Thelonious really enjoyed the reincarnation of Thor, which he has hashtagged for us. He enjoyed that comment. Gil Aquino wanted us to know, and I agree. He's basically giving us some backing on these things. I don't think it's wrong to give Dems more benefit of the doubt than ours. Ours are worse on all issues. They sacrificed lives for tax cuts. The only false claim I'm aware of was a right-winger. That would be Veritas and James O'Keefe, and his latest stupid stunt to try to trick the Washington Post into printing false allegations about Roy Moore. That was a really weird incident, wasn't it? And it is, I guess, equally weird that you find Ginny Thomas, or anybody really, but much more troublingly, the wife of a Supreme Court justice, giving the guy an award for what, to all appearances, should have been a gigantic embarrassment. But you're defending liberty by, falsifying. They're trying to falsify the news in order to prove that news is falsifiable. I mean, I think we all know that. If there were any truth to the constant claims of fake news by Trump or anybody else, then it would come as no surprise that news is fakeable, which means that you're doing nothing which means you don't deserve an award, among other reasons you don't deserve awards, like trying to lure CNN reporters into isolated areas and onto boats from which they can't escape so that you can threaten to rape them until they cry on camera and you say, haha, what a softie she is. She's sad about possibly being raped. Get it? Now nobody gets it. But anyway, yeah, that whole thing was actually quite reminiscent of what right-wingers occasionally do on guns, actually, where very frequently, particularly in the early days of gun fail, where the people were still hashing out, what does this all mean? What is this all about? You must be anti-gun. You want to take away all the guns. You want to eliminate all guns from society. And that's not actually true. Although if they had been arguing with Armando, he would have said, yeah, sure, absolutely. But anyway, they weren't. And I didn't. So, but they used to say things like, well, you know what? I'll make you want to have a gun. I'll change your mind about the necessity of having weapons at home. I'll show you that you need to be prepared for any random eventuality by planning a deliberate attack on your house. I will break into your home and shoot you and rape your wife. And then you'll be sorry that you didn't have a gun. And it was very interesting. I mean, that's like considered, I don't believe that they legitimately wanted to do that. Although, I don't know, some of them probably do. But I didn't think that most of them legitimately wanted to do that. But I thought it was interesting that they thought that that was like a useful rhetorical tool. That is, I argue that you need to be prepared for any eventuality that the random world might bring your way by being armed at home. And in order to prove the dangerous nature of society in general, I will disrupt the whole thing and intentionally target you to show you that random things can happen. Well, now, you can't show me that random things will happen by doing something specific and targeted. Now, I might very well change my mind about the necessity of having a weapon in a home if I felt like there was reason to believe that hundreds, perhaps thousands of people were specifically targeting my home for attack. On the other hand, if I were convinced of that, presumably there would be enough evidence to convince the police of that, and then people who were actually, in the profession of guarding such installations as this, that by which I mean the Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, of course, would probably stand guard instead, and I could do my best to get on with my life in other ways. In other words, though, it was very much like what O'Keefe was doing. That is to say, well, someone could fake news and get it past you. Oh, really? What makes you think that? Well, I will show you. I will do it. And then you'll be guilty of having been fooled by some random person off the street into printing fake news when in fact you would instead have been targeted by a concerted effort to fool you, which is, I guess that's what somebody would try and pull, even if they were a random person off the street trying to sell a false story. But the idea of illustrating how easy it is to get fake news into the newspaper by elaborately plotting a ruse to get that fake news in there, it doesn't follow if you think about it. But because they don't think about anything, they go forward with these plans. I told you that somebody else could do it with minimal effort, and I have proved it by doing it myself with tremendous effort. I mean, it was stupid effort, but it was tremendous nonetheless. I don't know. I find that whole mindset pretty weird. I'll show you by doing the thing that I claim to be worried about. That's sort of another thing. I'm actually worried about the state of the country. We're in this position, these people believe, of where every home is the potential target of random chaos and violence, and I guess it is to a certain extent, but I will increase the odds. The odds that it'll happen to you in particular are pretty low if you live in a relatively low crime neighborhood anyway, but I'll change the odds to prove to you that you should have been worried the whole time about something that really, according to the statistics, you shouldn't be. Now, in other neighborhoods, I suppose you could well argue that you should be, but that's not who you're talking to. And by the way, I doubt very much that most of the people who advance that argument with respect to guns would be willing to go and pull a caper like that in the neighborhoods where people really do have to worry about high incidents of crime daily. I don't think they're going anywhere near it. And the reason is, of course, they're afraid of crime. And, of course, anybody who lives in a high crime neighborhood who then actually does arm themselves and then makes the news having shot somebody, usually these guys are first in line to suppose that the gun was illegally obtained as well. They're doing everything they can to make sure that they get in trouble for having had the gun. It's a very weird dynamic. And I think it's economic anxiety that drives it. Anyway, I had promised, or implied anyway, before the break that there was some additional importance to the article that Charles Pierce had written for us and that Greg had shared with us from Esquire. What was with today's impeachment charges? I forgot that they were going to take place. I had seen notice of them the evening before, and some discussion on Twitter of whether they were worthless or not, because, of course, nothing was going to happen with them. And that's obviously true and was a good guess. But there's something going on here that I think we probably could spend a little bit of time on. And this is it. So what was with those impeachment charges? Well, we read the substance of them, and we know that they're correct and on point. But for instance, the subheader of the piece, don't laugh. Okay, maybe laugh. Yes, it's true, and Pierce makes the point that they first laughed at Bob Barr, and then a year later they found themselves impeaching Bill Clinton. And yes, it's true of a lot of things. And of course there's the famous Gandhi quote about them first laughing at you, right? But there's more to it than that, which is this. Yes, it won't go anywhere, but also, yes, there will be a vote. And yes, that vote takes place on C-SPAN. And yes, that vote is usually to table the resolution being offered. But I remind everybody, as we've said, I know, on this show in the past, a direct proposition to impeach the president is one of the highest, is afforded the highest privilege in the House of Representatives, according to the basic rules. And yes, it's possible to change the rules, and it's laughably easy to do so. As someone did point out, all you need is a basic majority, and the Republicans could certainly change that. But I would love to see them be forced to make that change, to somehow change the basic fundamental parliamentary principle that we're talking about. I don't even think it's in the House rules per se that this particular privilege is afforded. It's just basic parliamentary law carried over from, the parliamentary version of common law carried over from the English Parliament. And it's written up in Jefferson's manual, which some of you may recall from way back when we were talking about the possibility of impeaching George W. Bush for various reasons. But this is sort of like innate parliamentary law that would be very difficult to change without giving us a platform for attacking them on their generalized opposition to democracy at large. Anyway, the point here really is that any direct proposition to impeach the president is afforded this high privilege. Here's how the process works. If it is raised by anyone but the floor leaders of the two parties, it is treated differently. If it's raised by the floor leader of the majority or minority party, it is addressed immediately. And the basic default rule of what to do with such a thing in the House, whether it's a proposition for impeachment or any other proposition, if it's taken up for discussion and debate immediately, there is 1 hour set aside for it. Now, if it's proposed by anyone other than the majority or minority leader, pardon me, on the floor of the House, the Speaker and presiding officer has the option to defer dispensing with the question for up to a day. But then at some point during the next day, that hour has to be allocated for the debate. And yes, the vote will be to simply table the resolution, which has the effect of, killing it and dispensing with it. But you got to do it for an hour on C-SPAN and go on record as voting for or against a motion to table the resolution. And that's uncomfortable. And it becomes more uncomfortable the more often it's done, or the more pointed the call for impeachment and the more necessary. So the first time around generally does get chuckles because it doesn't get much in the way of reporting. It doesn't get much in the way of coverage, but it does get televised nationally, and it does afford Democrats, in this case, who might be proponents of impeachment, to make their case in front of everybody in a debate format with a flag hanging behind them and everything, and an official form, and wearing a suit and all the important things for the optics of something like this, and make a case. They lose the case on partisan grounds, but they make the case. It's also worth noting, any member can do this, and they can do it at any time. And there's really not very much at the moment that the majority can do about it. There would have to be such debates and such partisan votes after a case is made daily if they wanted to. And it's also worth pointing out, just for procedural primers here, there's nothing about the vote to table Green's motion that means he can't offer the identical motion again. Tabling it doesn't defeat it. Tabling it doesn't obviate his right to offer it again. He might offer it in different form, but he can offer it again in identical form. There's nothing about the vote to table that defeats that. So if he wanted to, and there's some question of the dynamics of how this works inside the House Democratic Caucus and how the leadership decides and how the membership decides they feel about a repeat showing. But if it got to the point where Democrats said, as a strategy, we think it works, it could be done every day. It could be done every hour. Hundreds of members could, well, not that many hundreds, I guess, fewer than 200 Democratic members anyway, could offer their own versions of these things. And we could be, honestly, if you wanted to, if you thought it was going to work for you, you could clog up the House's calendar forever with such motions. It would be really of course, you'd be subject to the standard attacks of obstructionism and partisanship, et cetera, but, it would have its effect. And depending on, if you thought you were in a strong enough position to do this, where the vast majority of Americans would be happy to see you choking the Republican agenda in the House with repeated calls for impeachment, if you felt like that was to your benefit, you could do it. Typically, Democrats do not conclude this. And of course, last time around, the question was settled with the answer of impeachment is off the table. That as a matter of policy, as a matter of strategy, Democrats were not to do this. And so it was limited at that point to one member of Congress, one member of the Democratic caucus who didn't care very much what the Democratic plan was, and that was Dennis Kucinich. And he said, this deserves discussion at least once. And, he hedged in a number of ways, not the least of which was calling for the impeachment of Dick Cheney instead, although that had its strategic value too. Anyway, the point is it's out there, and it's something that House members can do and probably will take advantage of more than once in the coming months. And depending on how serious people get about impeachment, it could become a bit of it could become a popular show, a sideshow. Of course, they can vote to table it over and over and over again. But it would be interesting if they did it again and began to compile even more votes about it. So there you go. I just think that's really interesting and something to think about, and to think about both from building a public case in terms of, if not impeachment, then just basically indicting the reputation of Donald Trump. And also probably worth considering in terms of procedural strategy. Like if the House is otherwise going to move on to this disastrous tax bill, for instance, what if you plugged up the entire day with resolutions to impeach the president? As that grows in popularity or gains acceptance widely, that will be seen or could be seen as A, less and less crazy each time, and B, just strategic, right? I don't think this is going anywhere, and I know that there are people who this irritates, but in the meantime, it's preventing them from doing this horrific thing, which they otherwise would do with impunity to all of us. So it's out there, and it's well worth considering as a serious option in the future. That's all I wanted to say about it. That's not to conclude for us that we are at that point. Not to say we aren't. It's all up to you. You get to decide. And I'm sure, though, that the Democratic leadership's view of it at the moment is, yeah, we're not there yet. And I don't like it being mentioned. Although, honestly, I've been through this so many times, in terms of having this argument of, well, we're not there, and it's going to hurt us politically, and we don't want people to think that we are coming in and threatening impeachment all the time, because that'll worry swing voters and they won't vote for us, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. We got this comment here from Jack Ox 48 saying, David, this is exactly the plan Dems should follow. Saying impeachment is off the table is worse than saying the public option is off the table. Thank you for laying it out. So we will see whether there are a lot of people who agree with that one. I think on this, in the show's audience, you're likely to find a lot of support for that. Among the Democratic leadership inside Congress, not yet. But we're working on it because, well, remember that we've been in this situation before, too. In the Democratic leadership in the Senate for many years, the idea that they could use the nuclear option or any derivative of it in order to change filibuster rules was, no, that can't be done. You don't understand. Yes, we do. It's you that don't understand. No, there's no precedent for it. No, again, you don't understand. There is precedent for it. It's been done. No. It'll make people worried, but people hate this idea. No, you don't understand. People don't care about procedure in the way that, I do, but voters don't, not in the same way. And, in general. And, no, it'll make us look like we're running roughshod over the rules. And then finally, eventually, it was the leadership saying, you know what, we're going to do this. And it was a great idea on our part to do it all along. We've waited as long as we could, but here it's finally just it's the last straw. And then poof, it was something that the Democratic Senate caucus was willing to do. And well, the same thing can happen with the House Democratic caucus too. Greg asking a question here too, by the way. So, was it brought up by a privileged resolution so it had to be discussed? Yes. That's the procedure. That's how Al Green got it to the floor. And skimming through Charles Pierce's piece in Esquire. Oh, Armando is calling and making noise in the background. Hang on a second, Armando. Just a sec, and I'll get to you. But yes, Charles Pierce describes it this way. Al Green, a Democrat representing the 9th Congressional District in Texas, took to the floor of the House to deliver a privileged resolution. Not a revolution, but a resolution. So, yeah, that's exactly what it was. Al Green knew what he was doing. He'd seen it done before and picked up the same procedure that I described. Okay, so that answers that question. Now the question, what does Armando want, and how can we get it to him?
I want a few things, but
all right.
Actually I called in because I have something to say on this impeachment point.
All right.
At least with regard to the Democratic leadership in the
I'm not cutting you off.
It.
All right, there we go. I missed your. So you were saying with respect to the Democratic leadership something, and we missed it.
Yeah, well, I was saying that I think that at least right now there is an argument that it would be imprudent for the congressional leadership, Democratic congressional leadership, to fully embrace this idea of impeachment, because there is at least a small chance that certain things that they want done now, and what first comes to mind is DACA, might still be in play, and Trump being Trump, he would possibly sabotage any hope of that if they openly went for DACA or went for impeachment. So I think there's a timing issue. I'm not against talking about impeachment. I think I would put February of next year as the point where I would have made that resolution that Al Green put to the floor yesterday. I would have waited till February. It would be my one argument.
All right.
On this, because there's still some live issues that we might, and I'd say the chances are slim, but slim is better than none. And I would have played that out to see if you get something there. I think once the entire Democratic leadership embraces impeachment, it's just war. I mean, I don't see, not that it's not war already, I guess would be the counter argument. You might be right, but I'm not sure that waiting till February from December has a meaningful difference, both in symbolic, political, and practical effects.
Yeah, I have no doubt that argument was posed to Green, and that's why you saw 58 votes for or against table. I assume it was a vote to table the resolution rather than anything else, or perhaps refer it to committee, but I would think they would go with tabling. That's instructive for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is it just goes to show the power of the privilege given to these kinds of resolutions. The probably unified Democratic leadership probably made just such an argument to Green, and Green said, point well taken, I just think you're wrong, and I'm going to do it anyway. And the result is, there it was. Al Green from Texas says, Nancy Pelosi, I respect you, I get your point, I think you're wrong, I'm doing it anyway. And you can get to the floor of the House of Representatives for your hour of debate but just by walking around your Democratic leadership. And that says a lot about the power of the privilege of it and the way Nancy Pelosi is handling the caucus. I'm not going to throw you off your committees. You're not wrong. I just think it's strategically unwise, and will demonstrate that by voting no, or voting on the opposite way. Not that we think your point is wrong, but that we think it's strategically ill-timed. And, best we can do is say, look, Mr. Trump, if you're going to get infuriated about it, look at the vote totals. And that's all.
I think that's the bigger argument, frankly, against what I just argued. And I argued just because I think it's a reasonable position if that's the position leaders should take. Of course, as far as I know, they didn't even comment on it.
Yeah. Not publicly,
look,
I don't think.
We've got a CR, we've got DACA, we've got a few things that we want in the next few weeks. Yeah. Now's not the time. So maybe, that's never the time. I said, actually, there will be a time after we do this, because that especially in 2018, I think in 2018 there's going to be a wider embrace of impeachment as a political tool to energize the base. And while the leadership may not fully embrace it, I'm sure they'll make sympathetic noises come next year. And to be clear on the merits, not only is impeachment right, not only is removal right, not only is calling for resignation right, the 25th Amendment is right. He shouldn't be in office. I mean, there's nothing clear. And the fact is, I think Al Green is serving a purpose, and I'm not sure it's the way this is playing out is not the best way. Have 58 out of 193 voting for it. have Ezra Klein decide that, wow, impeachment's really good, and have other people like Eugene Robinson talking about Trump's mental illness and things like that. This is how these things start.
Yes.
So this is how it starts.
I think they're playing it okay.
Everyone plays a role, it seems to me. So, I'm not at all adverse to that Al Green did it now. I think maybe it'd been more effective in January when nothing else was in the hopper, quite legislatively yet.
Well, as I mentioned, it can come back anytime.
Oh yeah, and I would suspect it will. So that's just my strategic thoughts. I'm hoping you'll give me 15 minutes to talk a little bit about something that's coming up tomorrow and Saturday, which is the DNC Unity and Reform Commission's final meetings to adopt recommendations for reform of the Democratic presidential nomination process.
Okay, yes, we can certainly devote some time. Is that something you wanted to do today? You want to arrange it for tomorrow when are you trying?
I wanted to set it out.
No problem.
Because it is tomorrow, and I'm hoping people will pay attention and start figuring out how they're going to tune in, how they're going to speak out, etc. So if you've got 15 minutes on the other side, I'd sure appreciate having that time.
Sure. On the other side of the break, you mean?
Yeah. Aren't we bumping up against the break?
Yeah, we are, in fact. And I would just, alert everybody to that. Sure. If you're in a position to do it, let's discuss it. Why not derail everything?
Well, I'm in my traditional, when I call Kagro in the morning, position of the expressway in South Florida.
Yes. All right.
It's time, you could use that sound effect of my screeching tires.
I know, we've got it handy, although we've started the music. But, there you go.
All right.
Okay, well, hang on, and we'll be out on our break in 10 seconds. And when we come back, a little bit more of a setup for the weekend's happenings on the final meeting of the Unity Commission. And how much unity will there really be? We'll find out after this. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on the road in South Florida. We have the road noise behind us. When we left off before the break, we were just setting things up. We'll give over a couple of minutes here to discussion of the final meeting of the Unity Commission at the DNC. Armando, of course, been following that for some time. So we'll set up what's happening procedurally, what they're about to do, etc. Before we jump into that, though, I will note there have been a couple of comments about the impeachment thing, and Jack agrees, though he's in favor of Green having brought the thing forward. He says, I think you're being very reasonable, Armando, on impeachment. Good points made, and we like to consider that kind of political and strategic and procedural nuance in everything. It's part of what makes us so infuriatingly reasonable. But now... moving on to the infuriatingly unreasonable, perhaps, or I don't know. Maybe we can all come together and agree how infuriating it is, whether reasonable or otherwise, the happenings on the Unity Commission, with no one here to debate the other side. Go on.
No, there's no debate.
No debate at this point about what's happening.
Just to
this
describe
weekend.
the state of play.
Yes, gotcha.
Before maybe I get into advocacy. As you know, the Unity and Reform Commission has had a series of meetings all year.
No, they haven't.
Since they,
just
pardon?
No, they haven't. I was just arguing.
Okay, I see. You're being unreasonable.
Yes.
And it's culminating in the final meetings tomorrow and Saturday in Washington, D.C. I assume at the DNC headquarters, wherever that is. I'll have to find out. I'm actually planning on attending. I don't think I'm going to be able to make tomorrow. I've got to tell people that, but that's a different story. But certainly Saturday I will be there. And
oh, wow.
Recommendations.
Okay. We're
pardon?
I guess we're flickering in and out, but I think we've got you now. The Skype makes some funny noises for us too. Okay.
All right. The what's in play? Well, the superdelegate situation, which we've talked about in the past. And by the way, if you want a full background on all this, I wrote a series of posts this week at Daily Kos that talks about what the Unity and Reform Commission is mandated to do, how it works, when its report has to be in, what is the voting process, who's on it, etc. For all the information there, if you want more detail than you'll get on this short segment. Anyway, they're going to debate what to do about superdelegates. You may be familiar with the fact that, in fact, the resolution of the DNC that created the Unity and Reform Commission basically has a built-in reform. And everything I'm hearing is that people are resigned to that's what it's going to be. Just to remind you, David, the reform is that I forget what the terminology is, but basically elected officials and very important people like former presidents will remain able to vote as they wish. They will remain unpledged, but all the others who are designated in states, labor leaders and the like, will be required to vote in proportion to the results of their state election process. So, to put it in stark terms, President Obama will be free to vote for whoever he wants, but in Iowa will be parsed into the results of the election in the caucus in Iowa. So,
okay.
Sanders wins 40%, and the others wins. Bernie will get 40% of Iowa's superdelegates who pledged and those are members of Congress and people like President Obama. So I think that's frankly a done. Other than to say that my own preference is the elimination of voting superdelegates, but there's no reason to even debate that anymore now. In that the reform that's going to happen, I think, is that which is written in the resolution. The issue of primaries, and the key phrase was that the commission was supposed to adopt recommendations that would encourage primary elections, which necessarily means it would discourage caucuses, is very much a point of contention right now, based on my knowledge of what's been debated. The one thing that I've heard on the rumor mill is there's going to be some type of small state, big state break on this. That is, that big states are required to hold primaries, or rather, if their states hold primaries, they must honor the primary results and not hold a caucus. This would apply to a state like Washington State, which last year in the 2016 process held a caucus despite the fact that the state government of Washington put forward an open primary which produced nearly 3.5 times the number of votes as that caucus did. Conversely, a state like Iowa will be, I assume, be defined as a small state. This probably will hold for Nebraska as well, which also held a caucus in the face of a state-held primary, open primary. I think that's, and no offense to her, I've actually sort of made my peace with her, and we're not fighting very much now. Jane Fleming Kleb, the chairman of the Nebraska Democratic Party, I think they're going to want to hold their caucus, and they're probably going to be allowed to, because will be deemed a small state. I've heard this rumor, and I think that's where that's going to go, but we'll see. Finally, everybody seems to be in agreement on reforming caucuses themselves. What that exact reform will look like will be interesting. The term Firehouse Caucus, which, as you might not know, but I will tell you now, is something to make caucuses akin to primaries. That is, you walk into a precinct location and drop off your ballot and you leave, or you can stay and fight with people if that's what you prefer. But you don't have to stay and fight with people in order to cast your vote. The other options are absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, things like that. That's all going to be debated, and the precise contours have not been, I think, fully developed. But the general principle of making caucuses accessible and more like primaries as much as possible is now, I think, pretty much the consensus. There are other issues that they'll discuss, financial transparency and blah, 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 and how do we win, which, of course, is a debate every year. But those, frankly, interest me much less. I don't hold as much interest in what the DNC does than most people. The only interest I really have in the DNC is how they run the presidential nomination process. But other people, I'm sure, I have strong feelings about that, and I leave them to that. So anyway, that's the state of play. Tomorrow is the first meeting. I don't know if they'll be taking votes tomorrow. They probably will. I believe they live stream these sessions, and you'll have to look at the DNC website for that. And I do plan to be there Saturday, and if anybody wants to join me, I'm happy to meet and talk with them and explain why I feel what I do. And it should be a marvel, a participatory democracy, in the words of James Zogby, in discussing caucuses. So we'll see. More likely, of course, it'll just devolve into a shouting match because that's what we end up doing mostly. But at any rate, something's going to happen.
That's good.
And I will be there Saturday to be part of that something.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll have to find out what the actual location is. I mean, I know where the DNC headquarters is, but I guess we'll try and check on that and figure out. Sometimes they have those meetings off-site, sometimes not. But for just the commission, I imagine they could just host it there.
It was bad of me not to know, and I should have known before I came on the show, but I confess I did not look it up. It is in the city of Washington, D.C.
Yes, or so they say.
So I've narrowed it down to that.
Unless we find out that it's in Virginia and they were just kidding. But yeah, in all likelihood, I think if it's just the commission, I assume that they could host it right at the DNC headquarters.
Oh no, it's going to be an open session with an audience, and that's
then they occasionally will do that at a nearby hotel. So sometimes, depending on what the seating capacity is, we'll figure it out, and we'll try and make a generalized announcement so we can mob the place with people looking for your autograph. Why not?
Yeah, right. Yeah, actually, I'm more worried about the tomatoes than the autograph.
Well, okay. You can autograph their tomatoes, and then...
Yeah, I can autograph their tomatoes.
That's so reasonable sounding, really, honestly. Right?
I thought of a dunking, one of those dunking things. But,
yes. The ground rules are, if you're there to argue in favor of caucuses, the answer is bring your tomato, but you have to stay there for 3 hours and stand in a corner before you get a chance to throw it, ultimately. And that's only if at least 15% of the people who are in attendance have also brought a tomato with the intent of throwing it at Armando. And then, and only then, after waiting 3 hours, will you get your chance. But if you're for a primary, you just get to show up and throw it.
That's right.
But you won't want to. That'll be the point. So, okay, that's a good.
We're
good
encouraging support of primary elections in that way.
Right. That's exactly right. And if you want to hit them with a
tomato,
tomato,
with the resolution of the Unity and Reform Commission.
Excellent.
Anyway, that's all I have for today. As I do urge, if you're interested in the subject, please look at my articles that I published starting from Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of this week. I go into it in excruciating detail. If you're interested, your eyes won't glaze over. If you're not, your eyes will.
Okay.
But I think it's extremely important for two reasons. Number one, I believe in voter rights, and getting as many people to vote as possible. That, to me, is what party building is. And number two, I think it's important because when it's 2020 and you don't like the rules, I'm going to be yelling at you, where the hell were you when we were arguing about the rules?
Yeah, fair point. That's how these things are done. You got to go to boring meetings, and sometimes a lot of them, to have input on how these rules will be written and used. By the way, before you go, I'll update you on this. Karen tells us the meeting is at the Marriott Wardman Park Hotel, so it's uptown from the DNC headquarters. I didn't think they would be able to accommodate a larger generalized meeting. Woodley Park Metro Station, I think, is the place you got to be for that. And so easy enough to find. It's north of Adams Morgan, though, and so don't go to the wrong place. So for everybody interested, both Friday and Saturday.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thanks for being on the ball and being our behind-the-scenes crowdsourced producer. This is the sort of thing that a professionalized operation would be able to bring you. Well, more often.
Well,
but I got the address for you again. If you're interested, Marriott Wardman Park Hotel, 2660 Woodley Road Northwest in Washington D.C. Easy enough to find. A map. Google Marriott Wardman Park Hotel. It'll take you right to it, and it's easily reachable by metro, conveniently located, etc. A lot of hotels around there. So make sure you go to the right one, Marriott Wardman Park.
All right. Thank you very much, David, for that. And thanks for allowing me to
Karen.
plug both my pieces
Sure.
and the Unity and Reform Commission final meetings. They are charged with presenting their recommendations to the Rules and Bylaws Committee by January 1st, 2018. So this is it. After this, you will forever hold your peace. Or maybe not, but at the very least, you won't know. There won't be anything anybody can do about it until the next on this. And it goes to the Rules and Bylaws Committee. If they don't adopt the recommendations, it will be submitted to the entire membership of the DNC. This is a real thing. It has teeth. Something's going to happen. So if you care about these things, you should be paying attention and making your voice heard.
All right. So now's your chance to
All
do
right,
it.
David.
Thanks. Take care,
Thanks a
Armando.
lot.
Have a good weekend. Enjoy the trip there. You got a long way to go if you're in Florida right now, so keep driving. And if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, like I said, pretty easy to reach. And by the way, if you want to make a day of it, you can go to the National Zoo, which is like across the street and up a couple blocks up from there. I think Woodley Park is the right metro. There's a lot of hotels around there. Be careful. You go to the right one. The closest one to the metro station, I think, is actually the Omni Shoreham Hotel around the corner. But if you head up Connecticut Avenue head north on Connecticut Avenue up the street from the metro, the Marriott that you're looking for is it's right there, and plenty of fun places to eat and hang out. And if you want to venture down into Adams Morgan after hours, plenty to do, and plenty of people who will be there doing it with you too. Wait, this is getting weird. Okay. But yeah, so don't head down to the DNC headquarters. You won't find what you're looking for there. If they're going to have a general meeting, they're going to need a hotel ballroom. Thanks again, Karen, for looking that up for us. She says, good. Yes, I need a job. So yeah, if you could, if we had lots and lots of money coming in, well, that would be something we could actually do. By the way, update on all of that information. I guess I got to update the spot that I stick into the breaks here, and I do mean to by this weekend complete a second spot for the third break, so that we can give you a little bit of a break from hitting you up for money and remind you that yes, you can make submissions to the show. That is equally, if not more important than donating money, although it would be nice to be able to professionalize things and have a nice studio that never broke down, or it wouldn't matter if you were putting a bathroom in to the house, you would be elsewhere, or you would have a standby staff of producers that could make everything work professionally right there on the spot. But that's a tall order. But the update on this is we've had a boom in downloads over the past couple of months. I'm not certain whether did Libsyn change the way it measures stats, or did we just fly through the roof again? It's not like the old days when the numbers were astronomical, but we've gone from, when I calculated that little bit for you in the break spot about 1 in 25 listeners being contributors, I was basing that on numbers closer to 3,000 to 5,000 downloads daily. The numbers now are, for the last couple of weeks and for the month of November, the numbers were closer to 10 to 15,000 people listening to the show daily. But of course, the number of contributors didn't change a great deal. So we're still talking about, well, now the numbers go way up, and it's probably closer to 1 in 100 or to 125 listeners downloading daily and actually contributing. We've had some nice contributions come in, a few people who are already contributors upping their contributions, and I feel bad about that because it wasn't you we were trying to bother with all of this. Plus some additional contributions that have come in through the Square Cash app. Oh, and new opportunity, by the way, on the Square Cash app. It's probably been there the whole time. I only just now realized it, so I feel a little bad about it. But Square, of course, the company that does a lot of the online credit card processing, a known entity. Not that that means they'll never be hacked, etc. I can't speak to their security. I hope that they're safeguarding all their information well. I hope that's the case for everybody everywhere, but things do happen. And I know people are sometimes reluctant to sign up for any new service that's going to store any sensitive information on your behalf out on the web. I totally understand that. If you're willing to, charge forward into the world of internet-enabled e-commerce, and we all eventually have to do that. Square, they're serious, they're real, they process credit card information for a lot of people, millions of businesses around the country. So they're legit anyway. Their new app, the Cash Me app, that is aimed at the consumers and aims to do a lot of what PayPal did also, and Venmo is also out there. A lot of people just use it for straight up sending one another cash or settling up bills. If a bunch of hipsters go to lunch and somebody puts the lunch on their credit card and everybody wants to pay them back, but all they've got is 20s, if they've got any cash at all, because they get their cash out of the ATM, you can use Cash Me, and it's like cash.me. They bought that domain to send somebody the $14.76 that you actually owe them when you work it out with a calculator, and send it directly to them. So that's the kind of space that the Cash Me thing is operating in. But it makes it easy to just, and you could link it to your own credit card, link it to your bank account, whatever, and it just transfers the cash. Pretty simple. If you're interested in trying it out, they have an interesting promotional deal. You know how it is with these things. If you sign up for the Cash Me app and you use our share code, which they give to us and which you'll find on any of our posts on Daily Kos underneath the player, where we have the links to Patreon and links to Square Cash. I now have the link to the share code page. And you can use that, and when you sign up, I guess, as a new customer, when you send somebody the first $5 through Cash Me, if you signed up using the code, they'll put $5 extra in your account, and if you use my code, they'll put $5 extra in my account. So I guess, technically speaking, you send somebody, anybody you want, doesn't have to be me, although it would be awesome if it was, $5, and the first time around anyway, Square will put $5 right back in your account plus $5 in my account. That makes it easy to contribute $5 one time for free, essentially. Plus you get your $5 back, and you get to send this other person $5. Now, if you wanted to send me $5, what would happen is they'd give you $5 and they'd give me 10. How do you like that? That's an excellent way to introduce yourself to Cash Me, I think. $10 to me and $0 out of your pocket, plus this fabulous new app from which all your information could conceivably be stolen. That just tells you that it's not a paid commercial for Cash Me. They would never stand for that. But anyway, I thought that was kind of a nice thing, and it's never failed me yet. So so far so good with Cash Me. The share code. Now, by the way, I guess if you just went to Cash Me and you refused to look at our links on Daily Kos and you wanted to enter the code manually, I'll tell you what it is. It's FLVKHBX. You should replay that for yourself on the podcast so you can hear it a lot. FLVKHBX. It's a bunch of letters. They're all capitalized. I don't know if it makes any difference, and I don't know if it's something you can enter manually. They give us a landing page for that code. That is in the posts underneath the player. Easiest way to make sure it all works out and you get your $5 back is to just go to Daily Kos, find our Daily Kos Radio is live at 9 a.m. post, or find us in the midday open thread post. It'll all be there, a clickable link underneath the embedded player. That was too much time to tell you about what a simple thing Cash.me turns out to be. All right, back to the news of the day. Let's see. When we left off, I guess what were we doing? We were wrapping up with other news before Armando jumped in. Yes, I think we were done with the reason why holding a vote or bringing forth the impeachment resolutions and how it was done was important. The importance of it being basically that you will see it again. And when the time is right, it will be easy to introduce such a resolution again, and again and again and again, and see whether your thoughts about the strategic value of such resolutions hold up. Okay. Any other things that we want to add here? Jack did come back with a couple other interesting comments about this stuff. As did Mad Hatter. Let's get them all on the record here. Of course, Jack had begun by saying this is exactly how the Dems should be playing it. Then he says, we got to keep working on it. Obviously, it will take some time. We just have to keep putting this out. And I just got up. Have you talked about Jerusalem yet? No, not a great deal. No, and that really has to go on the record. This is one reason why we have to keep doing this. Mad Hatter's comments here. You can find Mad Hatter under the Twitter handle of it's L Ron D is what it looks like, right? LEL, that is Ron ROND 50. So just in case you can't find him as Mad Hatter, but that's of course the name he's put in and how we refer to him. He says when Green is here in Houston and mentions impeachment, he gets huge ovations from Democratic clubs. Many people are ready. Absolutely true, and absolutely why Nancy Pelosi doesn't say you're dead meat if you do this. We just play things more open than the Republicans really do. Okay. What else? Jack also says, so what about creating war in the Middle East by moving the embassy to Jerusalem? He's on mountain time. He's just waking up, as I mentioned to you. You might have missed it, but this is a very good reason to begin impeachment, to be followed by North Korea. Then, of course, the comment that Armando was being very reasonable. Here's another comment here. This one from David Rotz, who says, the App Store, by the way, calls it the Cash App, not Cash Me. Yeah, Cash Me is the URL where you can find the link to download the Cash App. It's a very weird thing, and I was calling it Square Cash. They were referring to it that way for a little while, but basically they call their thing the Cash App, and for some reason they use the Cash Me URL. It's very confusing. The branding people are out of their minds over there, apparently. But you can find the Cash App at the regular app stores, for your various mobile devices. And I guess they call it, if you look for Cash Me, I don't know whether it works or they'll just point you to the Cash App. But thanks, David, for correcting us on that. He included a screen grab of his having found it on what looks like the Apple iStore, the Cash App by Square Incorporated. That's the thing you're looking for. Okay, so we got that straight. Now it's time to, move on to our break, yes, but we'll get to the Jerusalem thing. I mentioned to you that there was a bit of writing, and I think I've got a piece from the Washington Post that outlines the case that probably the president had no really serious idea what he was doing when he announced his decision. And he hasn't even really gone forward with much of implementing the decision yet either. There was some question about how long it would take him to get around to it. I guess now that he's sort of kind of signed something, that might have something to do with it, but I don't know. We've seen that happen in the past where he signs something that has no legal force, and the rest of the departments responsible for implementing this decision have nothing to point to and can't figure out what to do with it. But let's read up on that, and let's read up on a couple other stories before we make our exit for the day after this break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Good comment here I missed some 19 minutes ago from Adam Warner discussing the mention of Pearl Harbor. He says, there's no Japanese soldier monuments here in my town, so I have no idea what happened at Pearl Harbor. You can't figure these things out without monuments to soldiers of the other side, right? There's no way to know your history. Absolutely true. We learned that from, I don't know, some bunch of jackasses about the Confederate War memorials, of course. Warlock has this comment. I'm not certain what we're aiming at here. Perhaps time for your first AL, like Alabama, a donation to Doug Jones. Is that the issue? I have made my first personal donation, but maybe you were hinting that Square Cash would be a great way to make a first donation to the Alabama race. I don't know if they have a Cash Me account, but I guess if they do, then you could go ahead and do that. And I suppose that would be a good idea for any campaign setting it up. You gotta be like on top of all the hip ways to send money to one another. And I imagine you'll probably find campaigns with Venmo accounts before Cash App accounts. But if they did have one, that would be an excellent way to do it. You send $5 to Doug Jones, and then you'll get $5 in your account, and $5 will get put in my account. That is if you are, I believe it's for new customers and new downloads of the Cash App. I should have been more on top of it earlier on. Let's see. Karen, yes, you did in fact miss the earlier discussion of MSNBC's reinstating of Sam Cedar. We were happy to announce that early on. You can rewind and find that later, but absolutely true. First AL donation to KITM show. That's what it is, Warlock has to say. But AL. Okay. Well, you're being brief about it anyway, but it's difficult for me to process these things. It's still early in the morning, even though I'm on East Coast time and doing it while I'm running the show. Okay, well, we'll just assume it's a point well taken, even though I haven't taken it. Someone else is taking it, and they're doing well with it. How about that? Let's see. Moving on to a couple of other things here. Greg has a very interesting looking but rather long read to suggest for us, suggesting that the Democratic Party is both fine and, in fact, disciplined. This is an article by Sean McElwee. I hope we're pronouncing his last name correctly. Many of you follow him on Twitter, no doubt. The Democratic Party is fine. It is the most united American party in modern political history, as a matter of fact, but I know that feels hard to believe. But this an article in he says here by way of introduction, welcome to Takedown, a new column in which Sean McElwee holds pundits accountable for their hot garbage takes and isn't afraid to be held accountable for his. So you've got to love that. Although it's called The Takedown, you'll find it at theoutline.com. So I don't really know what's going on here in terms of who's doing what, but maybe this is another medium type platform. Anyway, hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. His last name is MC Elwee, E-L-W-E-E, which when I run into McElroy's is usually pronounced Mac. We'll take from that and decide that his name is McElwee rather than McElwee. But you never know. That might be a hot garbage take. Oh, yes, right. We were going to get to the Jerusalem issue. By way of this Washington Post piece that I saw tweeted around along with the comment suggestion that Donald Trump had no idea what the hell he was doing with respect to the Jerusalem decision, and that is always easy to believe. Trump had for months been determined to move U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. That headline by itself obscures the idea that he might not know what he was doing, but I think the reporting bears it out. Josh Dawsey, Missy Ryan, and Karen DeYoung share the byline on this piece from yesterday evening. During a visit to his Mar-a-Lago resort in March, President Trump approached legal scholar, and he is still a legal scholar, Alan Dershowitz, to talk about the Middle East. Why? Because Dershowitz sounds Jewy, so he must know something about the Middle East. Essentially his approach to everything, which just, reinforces our belief that he probably doesn't know what the hell's going on in the world and thinks anybody he knows would be able to tell. Certainly anybody I know knows more than I do because I'm a dotard idiot. So he went to Al Dershowitz to ask for his advice. While Trump questioned Dershowitz over his meal at Mar-a-Lago, Dershowitz, of course, they note here, is a confidant of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu while he questioned then Dershbag about the region. The president seemed certain about one thing, and that may be the only thing he was certain about. And that thing was where he stood on the U.S. Embassy in Israel. What he said to me was, I'm going to do it. Every other president has promised, and all of them didn't keep their promises, Dershowitz said that Trump said to him, referring to a controversial proposal to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He said there would be criticism of him, but that he wanted to keep his promise. In the weeks leading up to his announcement Wednesday, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, reversing decades of U.S. policy, Trump heard entreaties for and against the proposed move from advisors inside and outside the White House. President is hard, and he heard both pro and con. But I'm certain of one thing. I promised it, and lots of other presidents have done it, and they had good reasons not to. But I never have a good reason for anything. And because I promised it, I'm going to do it, even if it's a terrible idea. Even if my dentures fall out. Even if I get a sign from God, he's actually trying to make the teeth fall out of my mouth while I say this, I'm going to continue with it. The decision to shake off warnings from senior officials such as, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, for instance, and align himself instead with prominent proponents of the move, including Vice President Pence and major donor Sheldon Adelson, underscored the president's determination to break with past policy and keep a key campaign pledge. And it wasn't a key campaign pledge. It was a campaign pledge, yes, but it wasn't key to anyone's support, period. End of sentence. Honest to God, no one gave a crap. Even Sheldon Adelson would have just thrown money at you anyway. Because, let's be honest, he wants to be on the winning side of things. If you had said, I don't know about this Jerusalem thing, he would have prevailed upon you, he would have chewed your ear off about it, but he would have given you the money. Anyway, he wants to move ahead with this despite the potential risks to U.S. interests in the region and the goal of Middle East peace, because who the F cares about that stuff? Announcing his decision at the White House, Trump said that an eventual embassy move to Jerusalem would protect American interests, and also he'd be able to sell them the land for that embassy and make a killing. Most important, he said, it would acknowledge the, quote, obvious reality that Israelis have made Jerusalem their political seat, despite the Palestinians' hope to someday claim East Jerusalem as their own capital. Today, I am delivering it, even if I can't deliver my teeth to this announcement. For 2 decades, U.S. presidents had promised to do what Trump did Wednesday, but they ultimately issued repeated waivers to a law requiring relocation of the embassy. They said they were postponing the issue in hopes that it could be addressed in an eventual Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. This summer, Trump made clear that he wasn't thrilled when he signed a waiver of his own, according to senior administration officials who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. That decision was made with advice from the State and Defense Departments. So in other words, he didn't deliver on his promise. He did exactly what the other presidents did originally, but now he'll reverse himself and flip-flop and be consistent in so doing. At the time, an initiative to forge a new Israeli-Arab peace deal led by White House aides Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt was just getting underway. At that point, Jason and Jared convinced... That's so funny sounding. That's really dumb sounding. Jason and Jared convinced him that they were just at the beginning of building relationships in the region, and that if we do this now, we won't have any relationships to fall back on, the official said. But now, 6 months later, everything's fine. We have all the relationships we need. I've been a diplomat, as someone said, for a whole minute now, and the relationships are just falling out of my ass at this point. That decision reset the clock to the next twice-yearly waiver deadline, which fell this week. And within the administration, key voices of support came from Pence, Kushner, and Nikki Haley, Trump's ambassador to the United Nations. Kushner, the president's son-in-law, had supported the move from early in Trump's candidacy. And Pence, who is to visit Israel this month, told Trump that his base, he means his base, by the way, not your base, Mr. President, but mine, would love the decision, something the president liked to hear. An important outside voice advising Trump to make this leap was Adelson's, according to several people familiar with the two men's conversations. At a White House dinner earlier this year, Adelson made the issue a main topic, one person said. In the months that followed, Adelson periodically asked others close to Trump what was causing the delay and expressed frustration, these people said. I have the sense that Adelson owns some land in Jerusalem as well. At the same time, other Trump advisors were making their case against the move, most prominent among them Tillerson and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Tillerson, mindful of the death of 4 Americans in militant attacks in Benghazi, in 2012, pushed back vocally on one White House official said, already at odds with Trump over other aspects of the president's approach to the Middle East and the fact that he thinks he's a moron. Tillerson argued that the move could unleash a dangerous chain reaction across the region. That's what people are worried about. R.C. Hammond, which stands for, by the way, Remote Control Hammond. He's remotely controlled by Moscow, I guess. I don't know. A Tillerson advisor said Tillerson and Mattis requested time to evaluate U.S. outposts and fortify them if necessary. Okay. Some outside confidants, including billionaire Tom Barak, or Barack, depending on how you want to pronounce it, I guess, the guy who ran the inauguration celebrations, and I guess probably chiefly at fault for the likely disappearance of millions of dollars from that fund with no trace, urged Trump to hold off, worried that the move would deepen regional tensions caused by Saudi Arabia's political shakeup and Iran's growing reach. It's insane. We're all resistant, said one Trump confidant who recently spoke to the president about it. He doesn't realize what all he could trigger by doing this. That's some colloquial construction there. While Trump appeared to have made up his mind, such as it is, he continued to solicit input, 2 White House officials said, even asking random acquaintances about the Middle East in recent months. He loves asking random acquaintances about important sounding things that I'd love to have your input on this thing. But this is one of his negotiating tactics, like when he brought the advertising execs in. And I want to have your opinion on what do you think about this billboard? Is my face big enough on this? Several advertisers said he did not seem to have a full Advisors. Did I say advertisers? Anyway, said he did not seem to have a full understanding of the issue and instead appeared to be focused on seeming pro-Israel, in the words of one, and making a deal, in the words of others. Of course, optics for him, always the most important thing. Once Trump indicated 10 days ago that he would not sign a second waiver, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. We love the initials in this administration. You know who loves those initials, the first 2 initials? Russians. I'm just saying. I don't know. We had, R.C. Hammond, H.R. McMaster. Worst H.R., by the way, since Puffin stuff, if you ask me. Began putting together options that officials assessed would result in the least damage. The debate came to a head at a White House meeting, or as they like to call it, a WH meeting, November 27th, to hash out the waiver issue. According to people briefed on the meeting, Trump repeated his earlier assertions probably like a dozen times that he had to follow through on his campaign pledge, seeming irritated by objections over security and the break with previous policy. The decision wasn't driven by the peace process, one senior official said. The decision was driven by his campaign promise. Danger. impeach. Chief regional allies, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt, where senior government officials have said they still have little sense of the parameters of the broader peace plan being fashioned by the Kushner-led team, because there isn't one, were not told definitively that the decision had been made until late last week. All have described the Jerusalem decision as a step backward in the peace process. When Trump made contact with Arab allies ahead of his announcement, it was to notify them, not to discuss the matter. According to Nabil Shath, an advisor to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, Trump just went on saying he had to do it, despite the Palestinian leader's fervent objections. Trump also notified Jordanian King Abdullah II, a stalwart ally, in a similar call. It was a one-sided conversation, with the president saying, "This is what we're going to do," said a Washington-based official briefed on the details of the call. Trump said his administration was still pushing forward on a peace deal, but gave no details. In the wake of Wednesday's statement, U.S. officials say they expect a cooling-off period with the Palestinians before any discussion of the peace process can resume, but they are betting that Abbas's team cannot afford to walk away, and Kushner in particular is trying to assure others that a deal is still possible. White House officials say a key test will come later this month, whether Abbas cancels his planned meeting with Pence. Even officials with misgivings sought to look on the bright side Wednesday, saying that Trump's statement did nothing to change any of the components being considered by the administration as parts of a comprehensive peace agreement. They repeatedly emphasized that what had not changed after the president's announcement rather than what had. Trump's still crazy, so that's one thing. Trump's statement, according to several officials, was carefully constructed not to touch on any of the final status issues of an Israeli-Palestinian peace, including the possibility of two states, with borders yet to be determined, and a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. Kushner and his team are expected to continue forming their plan, which officials say is now more than just a blueprint. I don't think he satisfies anybody with a divided Jerusalem. That probably makes things even worse. But okay. The president provided a preview of this week's decision to major donors last weekend at a fundraiser at the Manhattan home of Blackstone Chief Executive Steven Schwartzman, whose name has come up a few times in a few different contexts. After being showered with praise by billionaire Ronald Lauder for being more pro-Israel than past presidents, Trump promised that within days he would declare Jerusalem the capital and begin the process of moving the embassy. So again, dinner with friends and billionaires who say, go do it. He goes back and does it. Well, it's better that they have that much control over him than Russia anyway. Although let me finish the article and we'll get back to what I was just thinking of. When another donor criticized the timing of the decision, Trump seemed taken aback. A friend who doesn't like me. No, I just disagree with you on this issue. No, this is important to do now, Trump said, according to someone who attended the event. This has gone on long enough. Other presidents have put it off. We're not going to put it off. Even though I did put it off. But I want to say that I didn't. He added that building an embassy in Jerusalem might take 3 or 4 years. And I know about building. Let's talk about that. And then he probably went off for an hour on that. What else came to mind? I did mention to you that there was something else that the Jerusalem idea brought to mind. We got a tweeted comment yesterday from, remember, Matthew Rigdon, who made those great comments about, I don't remember now offhand what were we talking about, but he made some very good points. And so I'm favorably disposed to sharing this one. Actually, it was about something else, and it was immediately afterwards. I'm sorry, although I'll get to your point, Matthew. Hang on just a second. Nolan Major, who tweets under the handle of Nolan in CA, California, asked, what are the odds that Putin pushed for Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital so as to push the Arab world into his arms? I suppose that's a possibility. And of course, if he was wise about it, he would leave the pushing to billionaire donors to do the trick instead and then have no fingerprints on it. It's well worth considering as a possibility. I don't know how much interest it really would be to Putin, but it's certainly something. He probably thought, well, this is great. It'll create, chaos and disturbance, so I'm for that. So I don't know. I don't know how to evaluate the odds, but there are odds on it. Now, Matt Rigdon was talking about another conspiracy theory of sorts, back to the Al Franken story. And this is what's in the back of a lot of minds. And if you look on Daily Kos, you'll find a lot of popular diaries hinting at the same thing. He says, putting on my conspiracy hat, which is what conspiracy theorists wear. That's how you can recognize them. Make conspiracies great again. Why are the Franken accusers largely anonymous? I'll add largely to this because they're not all anonymous. Largely anonymous, but the more accusers go on TV. The right wing says we're worse, we don't respect women, and here are accusers that feed that. Why are these women more afraid of Franken than Moore or Weinstein? And that's a good question. Of course, now they're not all anonymous, and we've heard at least one by name come out. It was Tina. We're reading the Tina DuPois thing that Greg brought to our attention. Yeah, I know they're telling the truth because he did it to me. So there's one anyway that's not only not anonymous but well known. But I think that's bothering a lot of people, and the possibility that's hanging out there that the accusations are either portrayed differently or are coming to us in a weird way, or that maybe the whole thing was a setup. There was this brief period during which people were considering that perhaps Leanne Tweeden had been coached into and coaxed into making these accusations and recasting what had actually happened in different light in order to facilitate these kinds of accusations. But it can't be the case that all of them are coordinated, though. I don't think there's any reason to believe, for instance, certainly not any reason I can think of, for Tina DuPois to say, I need to throw my lot in with Leanne Tweeden here. But, a hybrid could certainly be the case. I've heard, and when I say I mean Steve Bannon here. I'll mention this. I saw tweeted the other day, Steve Bannon just went down to do some campaigning for Roy Moore in Alabama. And the fact that he made prominent mention in his speech on Moore's behalf that he said something like, this is a setup. This is all a setup. You can just tell that all of this is fake news, et cetera, et cetera. All these accusations against Roy Moore are false, and Democrats are making them all up. It was a roll call, had this report. Bannon, I saw it tweeted, and I tweeted a comment about it. Bannon tells Moore rally, this whole thing was a setup. This whole thing was weaponized. You know that. Folks down here in Alabama know that. I could read you the broader story, but I'll just share it with you instead. To me, when Bannon says things like that, that means I instantly go into projection mode on him. That means he's probably in the middle of running just such a setup against somebody else. And if you had to guess who that somebody else might be, circumstances might lead you to Al Franken. I mean, that's certainly the biggest scalp in all this. And of course, it has been hinted at a couple of times by a lot of people. And then most recently this morning, Tom Arnold, of all people, who says he has seen outtake tapes from The Apprentice that would implicate Donald Trump in widespread and frequent use of abusive and racial, abusive language, racial epithets, and God knows what else. And, and people have got reason to believe he's in the entertainment industry. He might have access to those things, but he hasn't brought them forth. He's just teased everybody with it to this point. But he was tweeting, I think this morning, that he said something like, I'm disappointed in my friend Leanne Tweeden, and mentioning that her co-host on whatever show she works on out in LA at the moment is a Roger Stone confidant, and they worked together, and that it was his accusation that she was in fact coached into bringing forward these accusations. Now, it might be the case that Bannon could say, I have heard these things about Al Franken before, but nobody seems willing to speak up. But I think if we could prime the pump with a story, we could get other people to come forward with also true stories about his behavior. That would be the smartest play in all of this. I hate to give him any credit for doing something in a smart way, but he may have said, yeah, but how do we do that? And the answer is, well, Leanne Tweeden previously didn't have any reason to bring forward such a complaint, or didn't really have any reason, and in fact had been a participant in this, stupid, bawdy USO type sketch comedy, and realized, well, we could recharacterize this and start the ball rolling, and then other women who have more legitimate complaints. And I mean, it's not illegitimate to go back and reevaluate what happened to you. Things that you laughed off before that's the essence of a lot of what Roy Moore's accusers say. I didn't think about it this way at the time, but now I do, and it makes me sick, and I want to share the story. Leanne Tweeden, could have come to the same conclusion, or could have said, I'm willing to do this because of my partisanship, but it'll only work if women who have more legitimate complaints, perhaps, for lack of a better term, also come forward. And then they did. And like I said, I have no reason in the world to believe that if Leanne Tweeden is still an arch-conservative, even alt-right leaning operative, there's no reason to believe that she would believe that Tina DuPuy would cooperate with her, other than she perhaps knew that Tina DuPuy had a serious complaint to make and would join in if she primed the pump. So that's a possibility that's out there too. And one well worth considering. There's a lot well worth considering. Luckily, we still have Friday to spend on considering all those things, including some really fascinating discussions of, a lot of far-reaching issues that, we'll just save them for Friday, like I said. And we got to get back to figuring out what the Saudish Arabians are up to. Were some thanks out there and some requests for some more discussion of the Yemen situation, and finally some writing emerging on that I can share with you. There's plenty out there. There's been plenty out there. It just you got to get it to cross Twitter in front of my eyes to give us a place to begin with and to start the discussion. Lots more about this, about the tax bill, about the opportunities that it creates to call the whole thing into question one more time and to put pressure on key senators and House members during the upcoming additional votes, thanks to their gigantic procedural screw-up on all this, and, of course, much, much more. But now it's time to hand the microphones over to Justice Putnam for his follow-up show, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Today's daily special, look at this, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday. Okay. Starting off in the front cafe, we have an amuse-bouche of, are we up to date on this one? Yeah, right. Another amuse-bouche, right? Of Andrea Mitchell, listing off almost the entire world leadership vehemently against Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, or as he says, Jerusalem. Then, on the rest of the menu, we'll examine the pretzel logic, pretzel, good, of Trump's Solicitor General, which he used to claim the KKK is a protected class. Oh, that'll be interesting. Well, they protect their faces nicely with those masks. Anyway, they just need goggles on top of it for eyes. Okay, the former Colorado GOP treasurer missed a court date for a $20,000 theft because he was arrested for a $100 fraud in El Salvador, interestingly, the day before. And 2 days after promising to help homeless vets, Trump's Veterans Affairs Secretary axes a popular and effective program that prevents veterans from ending up on the street. After the break, they move to the chef's table for an exploration of how weaponized outrage is a threat to free speech.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
I like this chef's table feature for some more broad issues, not only the threats to free speech, but get this, the oldest and most distant black hole ever observed is providing scientists with some surprises of when the universe was first illuminated by starlight. All that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam next.